Central Ohio on this nice rainy winter morning. So plus side is some snow will melt off. But focus today, we want to talk about adjuvants, all the different types of spray programs that are out there today that we have at our disposal. Proper use of adjuvants is really at an all-time high to help you maximize the performance of your spray program and maximize your investment that you have on your acres. So we have a few folks with us today that will be speaking. Kyle McCalla from Growmark. Kyle is our account rep. That's who we work with. This nice, another subject, but this nice supply situation we're in. Kyle's someone that we partner with and try to work through those challenges. We have Dr. David Powell, also with Growmark, who will be speaking later. I think you'll find him a very good resource. Someone that you can relate to that can help you manage your acreage, so and the chemicals you're putting on. So, but first we're going to turn over to Jeremy Sollberger from Precision Laboratories. They work in partnership with Growmark on the adjuvants, and that's the adjuvant lineup we use at Centerra. And I'll turn it over to Jeremy to kick us off here.
Good morning. Like you said, I'm Jeremy Sollberger. I do work for Precision Laboratories, and we are the partner with Growmark that manufactures and develops the adjuvants with them for you all. So a little bit about me. I worked in retail like Centerra in Kentucky. I am from Central Kentucky. I worked at a retail location for 16 years as store manager, field sales, precision ag lead. So left that and went to the producer realm and helped manage 6,500 acre farm, did the precision ag, planting maps and all that fun stuff as well. So from that, I ended up back on a different row or in a different row as a product rep. I am still learning how to do that job. I am still feel like I want to be and need to be more farmer forward. So, and that's part of what we do in partnership with Growmark and Centerra as well is to try to help producers and salespeople alike, to get better at what we do. So, so as I was getting this presentation together, we were talking about one of the things that wanted to talk about was spraying, calibration, and speed. So the first thing that I went to was, what do we have on every one of our throttles or joysticks is turtle and bunny. So, and we all want to be full bunny. So this is how we might not need to be full bunny whenever we're running a sprayer is kind of where we need to look towards. So part of Precision Lab and some things that we've come up with is total spray droplet management. And we believe, the efficacy and safety of the spray application can be improved by managing factors in the tank, through the air, and on the target. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, is how to manage that spray droplet from the tank to the time that it hits its intended target. So there's a lot of factors that affect that, and there's a lot of things that we can do to improve that as we go forward. You all have this handout in front of you all somewhere. I put that there as just little bullet points that you all can take back with you to remember where we're at from the tank to the target. Just little things that we ask and would like for you all to do going forward is think about your water quality, think about how you're mixing your chemicals and adjuvants and micros in the tank, what order they go in. How do we prevent problems in the tank during spraying, after spraying? And then how can we affect that droplet from the spray tip to the target? And then how that droplet performs once it's on the target, how long we can keep it there before it dries up. So the first thing we need to ask is microns. So we measure spray droplets in microns. And so what is a micron? How small is a micron? So a micron is 1/10,000th of a centimeter. So pretty small. We're going to need a microscope to see it. So here is some just different things that we have measured in microns to get an idea of what it is. So a hair is 100 microns. So we think about that. A hair is pretty thin. Sewing thread's pretty thin. Toothbrush bristle staple, etc. So what micron size are we looking for when we spray? Does anybody have a good guess? That key target is 200 to 600 microns. That's where we want to be. We want to avoid these 100 to 150 microns below. That's where we want to avoid, because those are driftable or they will evaporate before they hit the target. So that's just a rule to keep in mind. So the fate of a droplet once it comes out of the sprayer. Something I did forget. Those forms that you all filled out, if you all pass them down to Kyle here at the end. Yeah, and then the fellas that just walked in, those sheets there, they're in front of you that have the purple and yellow piece of paper. There's lines underneath of there. Those are coverage.
You guys know it's $200.
That's right.
Wins, so.
Percentage coverage on those little squares right down there below that. It's for a $200 gift card for Amazon. So, yeah. So here's kind of the fate of these droplets in micron size. So less than 50 microns will evaporate before they hit the target. 50 to 200 microns will drift. 200 to 600 microns, that's the ideal piece. That's what we hit the target with. 600 plus microns will hit the target, bounce, and roll off to the ground. So, what if we're spraying in a 10-mile-an-hour wind? What happens? We're going across the field. Those 50 microns still evaporate. The 100 microns will move 17.3 feet from the time they come out of that boom to the time they hit the ground. 150 microns will move 4.5 feet. 200 to 600 microns will still move, but they still hit a target like they're supposed to. So, what are we doing to eliminate drift? We're going to add some drift retardant or DRA to our tank, correct nozzle, or if we're spraying extend, we probably don't spray today. This is with spray nozzles, medium, coarse, and very coarse droplets. Same thing as that paper y'all were looking at, top, middle, and bottom coverage as we get through different types of nozzles. So let's just think about Growmark or Liberty. What do we need with Growmark and Liberty? Coverage. So we need that medium spray nozzle to make sure we get coverage to make it work. So, but if we're spraying with this ultra coarse nozzle, is it going to work? Yeah, might work for a little while, but it's not really going to do what we want it to do. And then we're going to call Kyle, and because he's going to want to take the blunt of it. This stuff didn't work. I need a respray. So, but maybe, in essence, it wasn't really Kyle's fault, the manufacturer's fault. We used the wrong type of nozzle to get the coverage we needed. So, if we look at that, a medium tip there, top 11.1% coverage to the bottom at 1.9, ultra coarse 11.1 coverage, same percentage, just different nozzle. The bottom, we don't have it on there, but I'll promise you it's below 1.9. So now, back to different tips, XRs, TTs, AXRs, and TTIs. And then there's spray cards at the bottom. Just to give you an idea of what we were talking about on this previous slide with the medium, very coarse, ultra coarse. Now we know what nozzles do what and how they look whenever they hit spray paper. So, are you all changing your nozzles depending on what we're spraying? I'm going to ask. And it's, there's no right or wrong answer. It's very important to understand what nozzles go with what chemistries as we go forward, especially this year with chemistry going to be high. The chance of us having chemistry to make a respray might be pretty slim. So now to the sheet that we all had in front of us. this was the most eye-opening piece whenever I started with precision, because I was here in this 10-gallon spray acre. I was there whenever I was a retailer, because how many acres can I get over in a day is on how much water I can carry with me. We were spraying with a spray coupe, 400-gallon tank. I could carry 2,800 gallons of water with me with a truck. So 280 acres a day, I could make that turn twice, and that was it. My spray man was his own tender man, his own chemical man, everything. So if he could get 400, 450 acres a day where we are in central Kentucky, he had a good day. Every time I said we need to go up in water, maybe make sure we got, well, I can't get nothing done in a day. So this was an eye-opening piece to me, because I accepted that and accepted the complaints or lack of good spray job that he did. So here's the answers. So how many of us are spraying with 10 gallon? Nah, I'm just asking, how many of us are spraying at 10 gallon? I mean, I know, huh? Just depending on what we're spraying. Coverage, top, 11.1%. Get down to the bottom, that's 1.9. We're not getting much. 15 gallons, 29%. All the way to 3.7, 20 gallons, 52% to 65%. If I'm spraying Liberty, if I'm spraying Growmark, I sure want to be in that, between that 15 and 20 gallon rate. Because we take spray droplet size now. If this is our canopy, I'm spraying in a 10-mile-an-hour wind. This is 18 inches. This is 24 inches where the bottom of the boom should be. Here's the 18 inches, and I know at 10 mile an hour, I'm losing 20, 30% of my droplets. Now I'm at 10 gallon. I might lose another 20, 30% of my droplets. I'm not going to do a very good job. So this, like I say, this was just eye-opening to me. So just a little more of this. This was done in Illinois with Liberty. 15 gallon, 20 gallon, and another 20 gallon whenever we add FS Max Supreme to the tank, and to show the difference in coverage whenever we add the correct adjuvant to the lineup. So 17.7 to 51.9, might as well say 52% coverage with the correct nozzle, plus the correct adjuvant and the correct gallon of water. So these are part of this TSDM. If you are CCAs, if any of y'all have CCAs and need CCA credits, on Precision Laboratories webpage at the bottom, there are TSDM videos. This is one of them. We'll watch it. It's a short one. They're all short videos. They take about 35 minutes. They're worth 3 CCA credit hours. So any of y'all, or if you know anybody that needs credit hours, easy way to get them.
In previous programs, we discussed the impact of nozzle types and nozzle sizes on spray droplet size. In this program, we'll discuss how spray droplet size, efficacy, and risk of drift are affected by ground speed and system pressure.
One important thing to keep in mind is what happens as we make pressure changes during our application. I mentioned earlier that as pressure goes up, droplet size gets smaller. As pressure goes down, droplet size gets larger. You might be wondering, well, I've determined the pressure that I need for my application. Why would I change my pressure? And the answer is, if you're changing speed, you're probably going to have to change your pressure. Why does this occur? We mentioned the 3 things that determine the gallons per acre. If you remember, they were nozzle flow rate, ground speed, and effective sprayed width. Those are the 3 things that determine your spray application rate. If you're changing the speed during your application, you have to compensate with either nozzle flow rate or effective spray width to make sure that the gallons per acre doesn't change. If you speed up and don't change anything, you actually will be applying at a lower gallons per acre then. In turn, if you slow down but don't change anything, you'll actually be applying at a higher gallons per acre than what you were originally. So as you make speed changes, you've got to compensate with changes in flow rate. An increase in speed requires an increase in flow rate in order to maintain that gallons per acre. A decrease in speed requires a decrease in flow rate in order to maintain the gallons per acre you want to apply at. If you're using an automatic rate control system on your sprayer, It will make those changes in flow rate automatically for you. It does so using pressure. So as you speed up, the system knows it has to increase flow rate. It does so by increasing the pressure. Conversely, if you slow down, the system knows it must reduce the nozzle flow rate in order to maintain that gallons per acre. It will reduce pressure. While this system does a good job of maintaining the right flow rate, we remember that changing that pressure also changes the droplet size. So in essence, what's happening as you increase speed, you're getting a smaller droplet spectra, which is an increased risk of drift. As you slow down, you're getting a larger droplet spectra, which is a potential decrease in efficacy. You're reducing coverage and possibly deposition and retention on the target.
With that being said, another key part of that is if we speed up, we're increasing pressure. If we're running a nozzle that only has a max pressure of, say, 70 psi, as we speed up, we increase pressure. If we get up to 80, 90 pounds of pressure, we're now taking what that nozzle was intended to do, and we're blowing that spray program completely apart. So we have made more of those 100 to 150 micron below spray droplets, and we're going to lose those. So this was done at Mississippi State in determining ground speed and spray volume impact on spray droplet deposition and coverage. And these were done at 10, 15, and 20 gallons per acre. Evaluated my travel at 5, 10, 15 mile an hour. They were all using a TJet XR with an 802 to 8010 spray tip. So there again, you know, I know spring, we're busy, we got to go, we got to run as hard as we can. Please let speed be a thought in the back of your mind when we're spraying. So 10 gallon per acre, back to that wonderful 10 gallon number at 5 mile an hour. Here to the bottom, if we see, we have 832 objects. So there's 832 drops of water made that little piece of paper with that on that pass. Same pass, now let's go to 10 mile an hour. We've dropped it to 533. So we basically lost roughly 300 droplets by speeding up 5 mile an hour. Now we get to 15. Now we're down to 456 droplets. So we lost another 50. So that coverage sheet again, the faster we go, the less we're doing. So now let's increase to 15 gallons. At 15, we're at 373. 20 gallon, we're at 480, and those are both at 15 mile an hour. So this study says that speed will reflect on what makes it to the target, and that's shown. It also says in this study that if we increase volume, we can kind of offset the speed. So back to coverage and how much water we put down. So as long as we run 20 gallon, if you want to run 15 mile an hour, you should be able to offset your coverage by water. So this was, you know, part of that. You know, there again, if we're going to run fast, we got to add volume. Just like if we're going to run slow, we really need volume to cover what we're going to kill. Part of what we do is we have an app. It's Android or iOS approved app. It's the FS Adjuvants app. So what this app does for you and for the retailer as well, if you get what your chemical programs are on there, we can load those into your phone, hit mix, and it gives you the proper mixing order. Back to that, keeping things in the tank correct. I don't know how many of you all have ever mixed things wrong and know what kind of mess we can make in the tank going forward. So this app will correctly make that mix order for you so that we don't have any of those in-season mess ups, especially with, like I say, chemistry going to be short. Ruining a tank of Roundup at this juncture in the game, I don't think would be a fun thing to do, because I don't know if you'll be able to get it back. So with that, that is what I have. Here's my contact information. you all feel free to reach out anytime you have any questions. Reach out to your crop specialist and or me, however y'all need to do that. So.
Jeremy, back to that, the coverage sheet there, you mentioned how when you made the switch from the retail side to go to precision, how that was eye-opening.
Yes.
So can you, knowing that now, can you think back to when you were at the retail level and you saw some things in the field that made you think, hey, something goofy going on?
Mare's tail. That was, that was back whenever Mare's tail was on the market, and that was the one we were after. How many times did I have my spray guy go out there and we spray and come back, and 2-3 weeks later I have a customer come in, you can kill my Mare's tail. Okay, we go out there and look. Well, we always could find a worm in the Mare's tail, and that was always our excuse. Well, that worm's eating the pith out of the Mare's tail. It didn't kill it. And so, but it wasn't. It was this. We weren't getting the right coverage. I mean, and that's where we are with water hemp, Palmer, Mare's tail. I mean, all of these things, are they resistant? Yeah, they're resistant because we didn't get enough stuff on it to kill it the first time. It suckered back out. Now we have a weed we can't kill. And the reason we have these on the table, where's the 6-inch weed? It's not here. It's down here. And 6-inch weed's off label whenever we come to water hemp or Palmer. So that was the reason that it was eye-opening to me. Now I know, going back, well, I was screwing it up. It wasn't the chemical. If I was over here, I'd have killed it. So that was the eye-opening part to me, knowing where I had messed up in the past, and what did I do to get us in the situation we are with these resistant weeds. So, anything else?
Any questions for Jeremy?
All right, thank you all very much, and
I'll be here through lunch. So
Yeah.
if you got any questions, don't hesitate to ask. To introduce myself, like Dan said at the beginning, I'm Kyle McCalla, Crop Protection Territory Manager. I cover Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan. And I work really close with our retail partners, Centerra being a very strong partner of ours. Prior to this role, I actually got my start in ag and energy sales, actually as a bobtail driver. Then graduated college, got into energy sales, focusing on commercial energy gas for dryers at the farm gate. Transitioned to agronomy sales for 6 years, working with farmers just like yourselves, and then been doing this role as a distribution rep for the last 5 years. And truth be told, one thing that I really miss is the interaction at the farm gate. So I've been really looking forward to these kind of meetings with you guys, and I want to make sure this is as beneficial as possible. So ask questions. You won't offend me if you stop me, raise your hand, shout out a question, push back on me. If there's anything that you disagree with or you need some more clarification, just shout it out and we'll talk through it. So what are we going to talk about during my time here for the next half an hour? Specifically adjuvants. What are they and why do we use them? So you saw on Jeremy's presentation why speed, what the droplet size does, and certainly what nozzle type can do to the products that we're spraying. We're going to go even a little bit more in depth and talk about the specific adjuvants that we're going to use and why they do that. So we got one question over there that I know I'm going to address here in a little bit. Before I start, any other questions that you guys want to make sure that I address, either now or make sure I table those till we get through it? Like I said, if you think of anything, even you guys in the back, Matt, Seth, anybody that's applicators, if you have questions, do the same thing. Yes, sir?
We've been hearing a lot about water testing before you push the chemicals in.
Yep. I'll address that one now because I didn't specifically put that one in here. So the reason that you want to test for water, and David, you might be able to help me out with this question too, is to make sure that you get your pH where it needs to be, one, but then that you don't have too much iron. Everybody hears about iron, right? That's why we add AMS to the tank, because you want to make sure that the water doesn't tie up with the herbicides that we're spraying. That's the biggest reason why you want to test the water. Typically, you want to start with, you want your pH by the time you get to the spray solution. Most herbicides work well somewhere between 5.5 to, what, David, 6.5, 7 pH level. But then if you have really hard water, you hear hard water, right? That's the iron. And the reason that you do that is because the herbicides that we put in the water can tie up and bind with those iron molecules. So when you have hard water, you got to make sure we're treating it ahead of time. And you can do that certainly with adding dry AMS, any kind of an AMS or a water conditioning product. But sometimes you have to take additional measures if it's terribly hard. Have you had any issues with that with hard water?
I blame it on our agronomist.
Who's your agronomist? Hopefully it's Glenn, isn't it? I'd blame him too. I would blame him too. Yeah, testing the water is never a bad thing, honestly. And if you guys, Centerra included, if you guys do your own spraying at the farm, let one of your Centerra folks know. They'll get with me and Jeremy, and we'll actually test the water for you up at Precision Labs. We'll do that test free of charge for you guys, so let us know. Great question. So what is an adjuvant? I'm going to start with this very simple slide. You guys can read this just like I can. So essentially it's going to increase biological activity and or modify the various spray properties of that droplet. Okay, so essentially we're going to make the herbicide work better, or we're going to try, like Jeremy alluded to, like he showed, increase the droplet size, reduce drift, make sure we're getting really good coverage with a herbicide. This next quote, and I've done some variation of this presentation over the course of the last 5 years, probably 30, 40 times. It changes year to year as we bring in new products and things like that, new challenges. But I always have this quote, and the reason I like it, from Dr. Rich Zollinger, he was a weed scientist at North Dakota State, is because it's really true. But all adjuvants are not created equal. And I'll give you a really good example. We're going to talk about surfactants, crop oils, and MSOs. So within that, we'll just pick a non-ionic surfactant, for example. Just because you're using a non-ionic surfactant from Centerra, the guy that you may buy from the tin shed 30 minutes down the road that says it's an NIS does not mean that that NIS is apples to apples comparison to the NIS that the guys at Centerra are using if they're custom applying, or you guys are using when you buy and you're doing your own spraying. Big differences across all products. So naive's not the right word. Just make sure you know the products that you're using, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Say, hey, why is this? It might be a little bit more. Cost per acre might be 5-10 cents more. I can promise you if it's a certified adjuvant and it's worth it, it'll save you guys a ton of headaches on the back end to spend that little extra money up front. The other example, and this goes to Dan's question and Jeremy's answer, is so staying in that same oil category, non-ionic surfactant to a crop oil. They are not the same, and if a label calls for a crop oil, use a crop oil, don't use an NIS. True story. The first year when I was a crop specialist, retail sales guy working with a farmer, he had volunteer corn. What do you spray for volunteer corn? Somebody tell me. Select. That's exactly what we went out with. What do you have to spray with Select when you go out? What's the one product you have to have in the tank in order to make Select work? Crop oil. I thought I was doing what was best for the grower. I said, there's a little bit of a difference, right? I had my farmer hat on. I said, you can save a little bit of money just using non-ionic surfactant. Went out, sprayed it, got about a 20% kill on the volunteer corn. Called the Valent rep up, said, hey, we didn't get a good kill. He came out to look at it. Rightfully so, started looking at our spray sheet. We had a non-ionic surfactant. He says, I can't do anything. He says, you didn't use a crop oil. He says, we can't cover this. I wasn't mad at him, but it was a great learning experience for me. That spray claim alone was about $13,000 worth. They didn't cover it. We had to eat it at the branch. It was the right thing to do, and we did it. But I'm telling you that because it was about literally 15 cents an acre difference from an NIS to a crop oil. Adding the crop oil gave us about a 99% kill when we went back and resprayed it. And keep in mind, by the time we did that, the volunteer corn was 6 to 8 inches taller. It had put on another 2 leaves by the time we went back and resprayed. So crop oil is not the same as NIS. Crop oil is not the same as MSO. So read the label, follow it to a T. Use rates and proper product. Comments on that? I saw a lot of heads nodding, which is good because you guys know, don't make the same mistake that I did. So we're going to focus on 2 of the 3 main categories. Not that this bottom one, so buffering agents, compatibility agents goes to your question. You know, when you talk about getting the right pH, making sure your water's the right solution for the herbicides we're spraying. These are just as important, But a lot of what we're going to talk about today is activator adjuvants in that oil space, and then spray modifier adjuvants, which are going to be our stickers, depositions aids, specifically DRAs is what we're going to go into a lot of detail about today. We're going to start with DRAs. Anybody tell me what DRA stands for? It's not a trick question.
Drift reduction agent.
Yep. I say drift reduction adjuvant. Some people say drift reduction adjuvant. Same thing, right? We're literally modifying the solution, the droplet, to where we don't have driftable fines, right? You guys have all seen a sprayer going through the field. Actually, Matt and I were just talking about this last night, and I'll give you an example of why this is a good conversation. You go 15 miles an hour, you're spraying with your booms, and you see it kind of rolling up at the end. Those are driftable fines that you see. We want to reduce that because we want to get as much of the spray droplet on the leaf as possible. 3 types of DRAs. Any adjuvant, any DRA that you spray is going to classify as one of these 3. An oil emulsifier, polyacrylamide, or a plant-based polymer. The most common one, plant-based polymer we see is guar. That's typically the one that we use the most with our partners at Precision, is guar. Sometimes you can see tamarin, but both of those fall under the plant-based polymer sector. I listed them here in this order, not because oil emulsifiers are better than the other 2, or plant-based polymers are worse than the first 2, but this is just the order that we're going to talk about them in. Each one of these have a lot of benefits, and not necessarily pros and cons, because con isn't the right word, but each of these have things that you just need to be aware of as you're picking the product that you want to use. So real quick, oil emulsifiers, typically very low use rate. FS layout, which is what Centerra uses, is an oil emulsifier, 4 ounces per acre. Great product, works really well with AI and AIXR nozzles. You'll see that here in a second. Is labeled with Enlist, does really well with Liberty and with Roundup. So those 3 situations. The downfall of it is, even though it's a low use rate, you don't see oil emulsifiers in premix type products very often. Meaning, you got your 3-in-1 type products where you've got your AMS, plus your DRA, plus maybe a defoamer or a non-ionic surfactant. You really don't see oil emulsifiers in premixes. It's always an add-on product. So even though it's a low use rate, it is another jug you got to carry, and it does really well. I mean, John, Seth, Matt, you guys spray a ton of FS layout, right? That product, you can see it when you add it to the tank, right? So it's a really good product. Next one, polyacrylamides, a little bit higher use rate. Typically 1/4 to 0.5% solution, which is very, very low in the big scheme of things, which is more than oil emulsifiers. Good thing is you do see this product in premixes a lot. So a lot of the products that are approved with dicamba is its own animal. Dicamba has some polyacrylamides that are labeled. There's some products that are labeled with Enlist. We have a few. The one watch out, and you have to be aware of this, doesn't make polyacrylamides bad, but you just have to know, especially in the state that we're at, with all the different herbicide traits, dicamba, Enlist, Roundup, Liberty, HPPDs, right? The 3-stack, the 4-stack coming down the road, you have to know what your neighbor's planting, and you got to make sure that what you're spraying doesn't move from your field to their field, or even the neighbor's garden, fruit trees, something like that, right? That can be a big, big deal. Last thing you want to do, the last person I want to piss off is my neighbor's wife, who has a 1/2 acre garden out there, because I've had that situation, and they're the ones that raise the most cane. And it can be a pricey claim. At the end of the day, you kill somebody's garden, that's not a good day. But polyacrylamides are subject to what we call pump shear. So I'm going to give you an example. Say you start out with a 1,000-gallon sprayer. It's full of water, full of solution, and you start rotating as you're out in the field spraying. As that solution goes through the pump, right? Every time it goes through the pump, that molecule gets sheared, making it slightly less effective as a drift reduction agent than what it was before. As that tank gets less and less and less, you're circulating that water through the pump even more, right? Starting out, it's 1,000 gallons, really slow. 600 gallons, even quicker. 300 gallons, you're churning that thing pretty good. By the time you get from the 1,000-gallon tank to the end, you're going to be about, and we've got charts to show this. I can get them to you guys if you want them. I didn't put them in here for the sake of time. But I can actually show the half-life of a polyacrylamide, and it's half as effective at the end, as what it was at the beginning. So it's not completely useless, but you just need to be aware. If you're going up into a very sensitive situation, dicamba next to non-dicamba, you guys have a lot of vineyards once you start getting out in this way. Vineyards are super susceptible to products like dicamba, right? If you were using a product that was a polyacrylamide, I probably wouldn't be the best one that I would go with if you're spraying next to a vineyard. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Plant-based polymers, and you'll see this on the spray cards that we have here in a little bit. But plant-based polymers are going to give you the most consistent results across any herbicide and any nozzle type and any carrier gallons that you're going to use. Having said that, Matt and I, we were just talking about this last night, right? You either have to increase your rate depending on what nozzle you're using, and you are going to see an increase in coverage and droplet size with certain nozzles. Every adjuvant out there is going to partner better with certain nozzles than others. But this one's going to be the most consistent, the most effective across any situation, okay? The downfall, relatively high use rate. 2 to 3% solution, the one that we'll talk about on these next slides here, is FS Max Supreme. It's a 3-in-1 product, but it's at the full rate, 2.5 gallon per 100. 15 gallon per acre, that's 48 ounces per acre. I like to go ounces per acre. We're used to it with Roundup, have been for years, so instead of V to V, I always say 48 ounces per acre. So that's the one downfall, but you do see this product in a premix very regularly, another advantage of it. So what we had here, this is going to answer your question. So these two here, the only difference, we started at the top, we have Liberty, we added Liberty to it, 15 gallons per acre spray solution, carrier volume, and we use TT nozzles. The only difference in this card to this card is we added FS layout. Anybody remember what category of adjuvant FS layout is that we just talked about? Which three? Oil emulsifier, okay? And it's going to do really well. Do you remember which nozzle type I said it's going to perform the best with? AI and AIXR, okay? But you can see droplet size, not so much of an increase, but you do see increased coverage from here to here, okay? Now, let's switch gears. FS Max Supreme, I just told you, was a plant-based polymer, right? Guar specifically is what it is. We add this, same situation up here at top, just Liberty, 15 gallon per acre, TT nozzle, add Max Supreme. Look at the coverage difference from this to this. Not only do you increase droplet size, right, but coverage is, I would venture to guess, double. I wish I would have had this, because we've used these for a while. I wish I would have had, I'll bet Jim does have it, of how much coverage difference is from here to here. But you can see, obviously, if you're using a TT nozzle, you want to go with a product like Max Supreme, plant-based polymer, a guar type product instead of an oil emulsifier, okay? Switch gears again. We go down here, same thing on top, Liberty, 15 gallon per acre, but using an AIXR nozzle, okay? We do the same thing, we add, whoa, sorry about that. Add layout, noticeable difference on spray coverage, right? The conversation that Matt and I were having last night was they started using layout. Centerra made the change to go to Max Supreme for a lot of the points that we're going to talk about now. He's like, man, I just don't seem to get quite as good a coverage with Max Supreme as what I do with layout. Well, like I said earlier, this is just a straight XR nozzle. You can see when we add layout, it is going to perform the best of any nozzle possible that you can have, an oil emulsifier in general. Max Supreme, from here, daggone it, sorry guys. From here to here, I would take this all day long, but you can see from here to here is a little bit less than what the layout is, right? So back to oil emulsifiers in general are going to do better with XR nozzles, but I would still take this. But that goes to show, and I showed these guys this last night, right? Why drift would be slightly down. What was the solution we talked about? What did you guys figure out? All you got to do is go from the half use rate at 24 ounces to what? 32. And then everything worked fine, right? Now, this is the point that I wanted to highlight, and this is why the advantage of any kind of guar, plant-based polymer, is going to be your best bet across multiple situations. Same situation, we switch gears again. Turbo twin nozzle, okay? You can see the coverage here with just Liberty 15 gallon an acre. When we add layout, coverage actually decreases. So if you were to actually add a drift reduction agent, drift reduction adjuvant, and I would tell you that your coverage would get worse, that's not a good situation, right? Not for me as a provider, not for Centerra as the retailer, and certainly not for you guys as the grower if you guys are doing your own spraying or they're custom applying for you, right? So there's a science to this, and I made the same mistake. I mean, to Jeremy's point, another one was with Sharpen, right? What do you need with Sharpen to have in the tank when you're going out to spray? Have to have an MSO. You would have thought I'd learned my lesson from the Select situation. I didn't. Called for MSO, I used crop oil. I increased the rate a little bit, did not kill the mare's tail. Same exact situation. I'm like, okay, there's something to this. As I've stepped into this role, working with David and the team and retailers, trying to make this science more of a perfection and trying to help you guys as the growers maximize the investment that you spend. Dan alluded to that. This is why this is a big deal. Now, jump over, same situation here. You add Max Supreme. You can see a noticeable difference in coverage, but more specifically in droplet size, right? When you add Max Supreme. So Max Supreme, you will always see this situation with Max Supreme. You're always going to increase your coverage and your droplet size. Even though we proved that maybe layout would be a better option with certain nozzle types, Max Supreme is going to give you the best consistent results across the board, okay? So why is droplet size, back to Jeremy's point a little bit earlier, important? This is FS Max Supreme. It's a liquid AMS. It's got guar as your DRA plus an NIS. This point right here, which is the fourth bullet point, it's going to slow the evaporation of the spray droplet. What's the average temperature when you guys are spraying, we'll just say beans, posting beans in the summer? If you had to throw out a number, nobody's wrong here. What's the average temperature? 70, right? Humidity, relatively high, right? You can get higher than that even, right? I mean, there's been times when you go out and you're spraying 85, 90 degrees and it's 90% humidity, right? We can see that in May. We've had 90 degrees in May before when you're going out and you're doing your burn down and your residual application, right? We want to make sure that we slow the evaporation. Humectancy is what you call it, right? You want to make sure that spray droplet stays on that leaf as long as possible to allow it to break through the leaf cuticle, get into the weed, and kill it as long as possible, especially with a contact herbicide like Liberty, right? Coverage isn't enough if that water droplet evaporates before it actually can do what it does. In hot, dry conditions, that's exactly what will happen, okay? So questions on that, comments on that? We're going to switch gears now to the NIS, crop oil, MSO. Okay. So what's the purpose of a surfactant? Not a trick question. It reduces surface tension. I had a guy, David's probably going to laugh. Jeremy, you'll laugh probably. But I had a guy tell me when I first stepped into this, I really didn't understand what a surfactant did, right? And specifically reducing surface tension. Like, why does that matter? Guy said, well, it makes water wetter. How many of you guys have ever heard that? I'm like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. How do you make water wetter? Literally the definition of wetness is water, because water's wet, right? I'm like, that. You got to show me an example of why this is. And normally, if we have time, the cups that you see in front of you, we'll go through a whole thing. It takes about 20, 25 minutes to do the whole thing. But this is what it's doing, right? Surface tension, water, think of a balloon full of water, right? That's what the surface tension of a water droplet actually does, right? It actually acts like an umbrella type of thing that holds everything together. You've seen it beat up on a leaf like this. This is a really good example down here, right? It increases the coverage of it because the surfactant is going to break that surface tension and allow that water droplet to spread out on the leaf. Now we're only talking a difference. The percent coverage here of this droplet right now is probably 15, maybe 18% potentially, right? to this, probably 45 to 55%, right? So you figure you're increasing it by 30%, but when you think about getting coverage, specifically with herbicides, right? Making sure that not only do you have the right size spray droplet, but making sure that you get enough coverage as possible to make it as effective. This is what it's doing. So it just made a lot of sense. I'm a visual person, so when they say water's wetter, I always give that example now because never understood it before. Makes a lot more sense now. Okay, now I'm gonna put you guys to work. So these droplets in front of you, or these cups in front of you, I need you guys, so there should be pair up in groups here. You guys, you two, you guys over here. You get to be by yourself or you guys can go together. I need you, first of all, I do need the washers back. Those are not cheap and I need them for my next presentation. In order, put your paper towel on the bottom. Paper towel on the bottom, then the yellow spray card on top of, yep, just like that, yep, on top of the paper towel. Then waxy side up of your wax paper. Like David likes to say, this is a really good wax paper, right? This is the Reynolds high dollar stuff to really emulate the leaf surface. And then take your washer and sit it on top of your spray card droplet, on top of the, right there. Yep, now take your washer and put it right on top of your spray droplet. Now each of you guys should have a pipette. So in the cup in front of you is COC, right? Crop oil concentrate. So that's mixed at a 12 ounce per acre use rate. Take a little bit in your pipette and fill the center of the wax paper. As I'm going through this, as soon as you see something happen, make sure you tell me. So go ahead and fill the center of the washer, just fill it up. And as soon as you see something happen, tell me what happens. So any of the surfactants, crop oils, and MSOs that we see, each one of those are going to have a concentration of surfactant to oils. But there is a difference as you go from a surfactant to a crop oil to an MSO. You guys see anything yet? Yep. So what color is it? It's blue. So what this is actually doing, so a crop oil has roughly 85%, and it varies depending on what you're doing, right? But 80 to 85% oil to 15 to 20% surfactant. Now an NIS is going to have higher surfactant than oil, but what this is showing is that product is actually breaking down that waxy cuticle like you would see on a leaf, breaking through that, and that product's actually getting down onto that spray card. That's exactly what's happening when we spray a solution and we're spraying a herbicide onto the leaf, right? So that would have herbicide in with it. That leaf would be absorbing that in there. Now, obviously we're using a lot higher concentration. When I tell you to, use a pipette and throw it on there, we don't have droplets that big, right? And full transparency, you would see the same thing if you use just water, but it would take longer, okay? Now keep in mind, even when you're using water in this example, you're using a very high concentration. You sit something there long enough, it's going to break it down. But how long would you guess that you have before that spray droplet in 80-degree high humidity situations is going to evaporate, right? I'd argue you probably have 30, maybe 90 seconds, 2 minutes, potentially depending on the droplet size, before that's going to evaporate, right? That's why you need the activity really, really quick. So that's what this is doing. So an oil is going to speed up leaf cuticle penetration, increase your weed control, and you're going to see it prove my example earlier. Crop oils are going to be more effective than NISs, specifically in low humidity, drier conditions, and on larger weeds. Thoughts on that, on the example that you guys see? I, again, am a visual person. So when I'm asking a grower, when I'm talking to the Centerra folks, and I'm saying, guys, you got to have this product in there. They're like, why? Right? Everybody wants to ask why, and I understand that. Right? This is why, and I have no issue pushing back because using the right products at the right rates is going to make your $30, $40, $50 an acre purchase of herbicides more effective, and it's going to save you 10 times worth of headaches that you would have to go back and do a respray. And I would venture to guess that this year resprays are going to be slim to none because the product's not going to be there across the industry. Okay, so we want to utilize the first time we're going across there, the second time we're going across there, making intentional applications with the products that we have. So now we get to MSOs. The difference of MSOs is a little bit higher concentration of oil, a little bit lower concentration of surfactants, similar but greater activity than crop oil, right? Doesn't tweak it a whole lot. Methylated seed oils are going to penetrate the cuticle more efficiently, and they're going to perform well under hot, dry conditions. Now, what's that bottom red thing say? You're right here in the middle. Read that for me. Higher crop injury potential. MSOs do really well at what they do. So in this cup is FS Optique, which is our MSO. This MSO, back to the original slide. I'm going to go back here. This here, all adjuvants are not created equal. Just because you're buying an MSO does not mean it's the same MSO as what you're getting. FS Optique or Optivix. Optivix is a high surfactant methylated seed oil concentrate. Canola oil. A lot of MSOs that you see are soybean oil based. Canola's oil is even a little bit hotter, right? Higher concentration. So why do we not want to post with an MSO? So I mix this at 20 ounces per acre. Why do I have 3 cups? You guys can kind of start to see this on the, so I did the same thing. I just mixed it in here. I agitated it. You can see that it's bleeding through, actually ate through a styrofoam cup and is starting to bleed through the second cup into the third. There it goes, it's dripping right now. That's why you don't want to post with an MSO if it tells you to use a crop oil or an NIS, right? Because in this situation, you could actually kill a soybean crop or a corn crop for that matter, right? If you're going across with a product that tells you to use a crop oil, you're like, man, that field is weedy. I need to make sure I kill it good. You want to use an MSO, you'll kill the corn, right? If it'll do this to a styrofoam cup, imagine what it's going to do to your corn or your soybean plant, okay? I'll pass this around. You guys can see this and play with it. But all I did, and David loves this. Sometimes you can do it just right if you get just enough foam that it'll actually like pull apart and it gets real stringy like gum, right? But it actually ate completely through that. That's not manufactured. I got to do it again. We're doing this in Andover here this afternoon. You guys can watch me. I'll make it so you can see that I'm not doing anything sneaky. I'll show you what I'm doing, but it's just crazy to see.
Will it work on giant ragweed that way? That's one of them they sacrifice a little bit here.
It will. So that's a really good comment. And so you guys have probably heard the, David, I know you're used to this, right? If you're not burning beans, you're not killing weeds, right? You got to bronze them a little bit in order to kill it. Even with a crop oil under the right conditions, you guys will get some crop damage, okay? That's to be expected. The problem is, to your question, yes, it'll have the same effect on giant ragweeds, but if it's going to kill the crop, killing the weeds not going to do much difference. Using the right crop oil, spraying the weed when it's here versus here will keep you from having to do that. Because I can tell you, even on, who here sprayed Flexstar or Flexstar GT, any kind of a PPO across the beans. You use a crop oil with it and you still ding the beans no matter what, right? It doesn't matter if it's 70 degrees or 90 degrees, you'll still ding the beans. But it's a lot easier to kill a weed with Flexstar that's this tall than if you're getting close to canopy and you're trying to kill a ragweed that's coming through and it's this tall, right? So yes, you will, but I can promise you if you're using the right rates, if you're using multiple modes of action, right, with a crop oil, for example, with a Flexstar type product, you'll have good effectiveness, right? The biggest thing, and I'm not going to steal David's thunder, is making sure you're using residuals and layering residuals. David's going to talk about that. Like I said, each of these presentations kind of build on one another. So great comments, good questions. That's all for me. Other thoughts, questions, comments, concerns?
That is hot to begin with.
Yep.
Canola, sunflower, all that, but the sun and the heat
Oh, yeah.
also make it hotter.
Great point.
So if you're going to do a burn down with no crop,
Yep.
the hotter and sunnier it is, the better it's gonna.
Yep. Absolutely. So it's a really good point, right? So when do we use sharpen? You can't post with sharpen, right? You have to use sharpen in a burn down situation. What did we already talk about that you need with sharpen? MSO. to this point, because this will, when you don't have a crop out there, you want to have that same effect on the weeds. And that's exactly right. You can go out, and I've seen this, we did experiments, you can go out with just a sprayer full of water, if it's hot and dry enough, and you can actually ding the beans, because it acts like a magnifying glass, right? The sun, the water, heats it up a little bit, you'll get some speckling on the leaves. It'll come out of it, but same situation. So,
How are you set on getting product?
say that again.
How are you set on getting product?
Good question. I figured something like that would come up. So, quick supply. Actually, I got a presentation. This will lay it out a little bit better. So, supply. So, you guys are obviously aware of what's going on right now in the supply situation. I just got to figure out where this is.
Ours was guaranteed to be here.
That's exactly where I was getting at. I didn't want to say that yet. I wasn't seeing if someone's going to get dinner or not.
So you guys got lunch covered.
I'm a dark guy back here.
So I was actually at Sullivan yesterday with those guys, and we were going through, and I'm not just saying this because you guys are in here, but Centerra as a whole is probably in the best shape of any of the retailers that I work with, because of the preparation and the proactiveness that they took. I'm not going to paint these guys into a perfect situation, product's tight, right? All the more reason we need to be very good stewards, good managers of the product that we have, okay? Because there's not the endless supply. We're normally, right now, for example, Liberty's going to be 70% short across the entire market. Roundup's going to be 70% short. You just heard, I don't know if you guys heard about Bayer's announcement of a force majeure. The branded product, our Bullseye HLK is going to be okay, but it's probably going to affect the generic market. It's going to delay that 3 to 4 months. I told these guys too, here's a really good statistic for you. Take the 20 most common products that we use in ag. I don't know, Roundup, 2,4-D. I put a list together. Dicamba, the insecticides. There's about 20 of them that I would classify. 16 of those 20 we currently right now have on managed or allocated supply, and that's not just Growmark, that's the entire industry. So not trying to freak you guys out, but all the more reason, adding $1, $1.50, either in a surfactant to begin with, or making sure you're using the right use rate and spending an extra 50 cents, 75 cents, $1 an acre on the front end to guarantee that it's going to work. Again, not taking away from David's presentation, but making sure you're using residuals. The easiest weed to control, sorry David, I'm stealing your thunder. Easiest weed to control is one that hasn't even come up yet, right? If it hasn't even come up, best case scenario for everybody. So we actually went through, how long did we spend walking through the tanks in the warehouse last night? An hour and a half? Probably. Just taking a look at where things were at. We actually got a delivery of some products that were actually getting pretty tight. So Growmark works really tight with Dan and his team, and to give these guys a lot of credit, they take the advice that I've been given for 6 to 8 months now that things are going to get tight. Let's order things, let's be proactive. But I don't want to paint a false picture either. These guys aren't going to have enough product to go over and respray your fields 2 or 3 times, right, if you need to. Utilize it the best way that we can. Yeah, if I can find my presentation here, I'll answer it as I try to find it. So what is creating the supply issue is really a trickle effect of going back to COVID, but you even go back to Trump's presidency. Forgive me, guys, because I think this is going to say Central Ohio. I did this presentation for their board of their board members. Actually, this one says legacy, but that's okay. So real quick, I'm going to go through this quick because I don't want to take David's time. There you go. So the trade war with China, which started with Trump, right, increased tariffs, started the supply shortage, okay? Go down a couple more years, right? Started in 2019, necessarily in China, trickled into us in March of 2020, we get COVID. So now we have a reduced workforce, labor gets tight, production and ports all get tight. So what's going on in China right now? Olympics that everybody's watching. When was the last time that glyphosate, we saw a spike in glyphosate. 2008, where were the Olympics? China. Coincidence? No. They actually shut down Providences over the last 4 to 5 to 6 months to make the air quality look better in China. So it looks more appealing, right? Well, what do they do when they shut down full provinces? They shut down production, right? On top of that, right, you had COVID. Anytime they get a COVID case over there, they shut everything down, right? We saw that, right, initially when COVID first came out. You saw it in the pork production facilities, you saw it in the ethanol plants, right? Somebody test negative. It spread like wildfire. They had to shut down for a week, 10 days, and sanitize everything. Anybody take a look. You can actually do this on what's the website where you can actually look at the port, get a satellite image. U.S. Port of LA, biggest inbound port in the U.S. At any given time, you can see all the red dots out there. Those are boats that are docked that are waiting to be unloaded. Some of them for 2 and 3 months. All those boats have active ingredients or inert ingredients that go into a finished good product that get manufactured and get finished here in the U.S. One of those facilities, it just keeps adding up. Luling, Louisiana, which is where Bayer's manufacturing facility is for their glyphosate, had a shutdown. It was for the hurricane. It was, what, 3 months ago, ballpark? So it was something completely out of our control. Weather adds to the delay. Then what we get first of the week over the weekend, Bayer comes out with a force majeure letter. Because of all these things, right, everything starts getting backed up and backed up. This is this is the best visual that I can give you guys. Obviously we saw a draw on key AIs, right, but what do I mean when channel inventories are gone? Growmark alone, and Growmark's one of 4 or 5 major distributors in the U.S., just Growmark alone, sitting on packaged, meaning 2x2.5s, 4x1s, and shuttles. From 2020 coming into 2021 last year, we were sitting on, across our 7 warehouses in U.S. and Canada, 130,000 gallons of packaged product. Every bit of that got used up by 20th of July. And then from then on out, we were just waiting on timely deliveries from our partners that have our glyphosate. All the channel inventories are gone. So again, not to scare you guys, we're not sitting on 130,000 gallons to get us through this next year. Nobody is. Whether it's Growmark, Winfield, Helena, Nutrien, who am I forgetting? Doesn't matter. The 10 sheds, they don't have it. Nobody's got it, right? All the channel inventories are gone, which causes product to go on allocation. So this is something that's been building for the last 5 years, right? And it just keeps technically getting a little bit worse. Another thing, out of our control, everybody had great yields last year. It was a phenomenal year from a production standpoint. The early spring, which is a good thing, but put a huge draw on inventories earlier than what we expected. I don't want a late spring. I'm not trying to jinx anybody in here, but the last thing that we want is an early spring. Everybody start doing your burn down on April 20th, get your planting done by May 20th, and that window will be good. If it gets any earlier than that, things are just going to continue to get tight. Best advice, and this is true. I'm a Ohio State fan, you can tell. Talk about Plan B now. Talk with Dan. Talk with the guys back there. Talk to the applicators, the sales guys, John, the branch managers. Talk to them. Talk about Plan B. Be proactive. Do not wait until April to say, hey, I think I need this. I forgot about this. What do you think, right? You can use that to try to beat some sense into Glenn. There's nothing wrong with that. That might work too.
Sure, your Plan B should be a mobile plow.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot more tillage. There's going to be a lot more tillage this year, I think. One, because it was a wet fall, right? I mean, Enrose got beat down. So that's going to be one thing. But talk about Plan B now. Manage your expectations, right? That's the biggest thing. Don't be naive, right? I always say this. I'd be lying if I said that this was an easy year. I've had a lot of hard conversations. Dan and I have had a lot of hard conversations. I don't want to not be able to get you guys anything. I don't want to be able to get them anything to put you guys in a tough situation. But communication is the only way that we're all going to get through this. And it doesn't do any of us any good to start pointing the finger, right? Because how many fingers you always got pointing back? This sounds like a stupid elementary school lesson, right? Take some ownership, have the conversation, be proactive, help them help you, right? Because the more that we can do now together, everybody in this room, Growmark, Centerra, you guys as the growers, it's going to make a huge difference. That help answer your question? Like I said, that was completely off key. Great question. I was somewhat prepared to talk through that because I thought it might come up. But other questions? Call this the Glen beaten stick. I'm going to be hard to break that. That's all I got for you guys. David Powell. Yeah, you can try. David Powell's up next. I don't want to brag him up too much, but David came from Bloomington. David, you should be good. Don't feel rushed in your presentation. But David's a huge resource. Before I let him introduce himself, he's a huge resource for me. He's a technical weed agronomist and has a lot of experience in this area. So even though he works out of Bloomington, he'll give you some of his farming background. But he did his doctorate at Michigan State, specifically on water hemp. So he's used to the eastern corn belt side of things, and huge resource. So don't hesitate to ask him questions. He farms, so he sees the practical side of things, but there's nothing that he would recommend that he's not doing on his own farm. So David, take it over, buddy. Yep.
Let's have a conversation today. I'd rather have a conversation than talk at you, right? So I actually live 30 miles from St. Louis, right? So that's kind of where I grew up, and that's where I live now. I farm 25 miles north of where I live today. So where I live at today is getting like 1/10 of an inch of ice, and the farm is getting 8 inches of snow and a blizzard warning today. So that just shows you how much things change whenever you get in those transitionary zones. So yeah, so my background is I'm a farm kid who didn't want to leave the farm, and the day I had to take, if you had kids, you had to take the ACT, right, to see what college you were going to get into or whatever. I was eating my Cheerios at the table, thinking I'm going to, be able to farm with Dad for the rest of my life. And that's the day he told me, you better do really good on this test because you can't stay home and farm with me, right? So I said, okay, I guess I better pay attention to this thing then. So I got my master's in Southern Illinois University, my bachelor's and my master's with Brian Young. I worked on water hemp, right? So we're looking at resistant. My project was actually looking at glyphosate and PPO resistant water hemp and ALS resistant water hemp. And then my worked a lot with mare's tail down there. Then I went to Michigan State, and then worked with Palmer Amaranth. So that's kind of my glyphosate and ALS resistant Palmer Amaranth. So that's a little bit about my background. And then once I spent a decade in school, Dad said, hey, let's talk succession planning. I'm about ready to get done, right? So then if I just would have waited 10 years and bummed around the farm, I could have just farmed instead. So that's where I'm at today. So we're going to talk. I have the best job at Growmark because I have 0 sales goals. And so my entire job is to educate our people and to train them and to support them. So I have 0 sales goals, so you can ask me any question you want, and I will answer with my opinion of the correct answer, right? So you get what you pay for there. It's my opinion of the correct answer. So, for those of you in the back with the eye chart, I do have, we're going to talk about weed control and the value of residuals, but I also have a question for you. Do you have any glyphosate that you can sell me, right? So I could use a little extra as well. So probably in the same category of things. So for those of you who have a short attention span, just like me, these next 4 bullets right here on this slide, read those, and then you can come back at the end and tell me exactly what we talked about. So I like to tell you what I'm going to tell you. So it seems like I try to talk about weed control in corn and soybeans, and the conversation goes to soybeans all the time, right? It's a little bit easier to control our weeds in corn than it is our soybeans, so that seems to be like where we spend our time. So there's 4 steps to managing your weeds. 1 is going to be using residual pre-emergence herbicides. The second is going to be make sure that you use effective use of your post herbicides. The third, we're going to talk a little bit about overlapping residuals. And then the last thing, these are the things, hopefully I get you on my side, because in the end, these are the 4 step are things that you have direct control over, right? Regardless of anybody else. Your cultural practices, things you can do, some of them get a little bit out there. Some of them are really, really easy, right? So just a few things to think about. So the first thing here to show you some pictures of some residual pre-herbicides. So this is a replicated research that I did in, this was in northern Illinois a few years ago. As you can see, there are some soybeans in some of these plots, it looks like, right? So the left here is the non-treated. Anybody know what weed that is from the back? It's pigweed species. It's really hard to tell. That's water hemp, right? So you can see there's a lot of water hemp out there. And essentially, all I just want to show you, and we could look at all of these at the same time. These are the how many brand names do you think are out there? You hear commercials all the time with different herbicides, right? Different things you can use, and it gets so messed up in your head, right? Because hey, you could use this and mix this with this, and you can mix this premix with that premix, and then all of a sudden, here's all the branded products, and now we're going to have 24 generic products of the branded product, and then there's slight variations, right? So it gets really confusing really quickly. For something, let's break this down a lot easier. For a pigweed species, there are only 4 main groups of pesticides you can even use to kill water hemp or palmer or your pigweed that are in your field. It's not that difficult from a pre-emergent standpoint. It's when we start mixing and matching and making all these names and marketing campaigns that it gets really difficult. So you can see here, the one that does the least probably is a group 3 herbicide. So these are, for some of us that have been around for a little longer, those are our yellow herbicides. So if we think about our dinitroanilins, our pendimethalins, our prowls, our prowl type products. So you can see here that, would you call that acceptable weed control? No, I wouldn't call that acceptable. Yeah. It depends on who you are if that's acceptable, right? You know, maybe if that were an organic situation, maybe you might think that's still not very good, right? So in this case, it's not that great on water hemp, and that just has to do with primarily, you know, the soil type and the type of herbicide, right? So these yellow herbicides, they're not very water soluble. So for a herbicide, maybe we should start here. For a residual herbicide, for it to kill a plant, what it must do is it must get in the soil and it must be in the soil solution. Soil solution is a fancy word for saying that it's got to be in the water that's in the soil, the free water. And then the plant has to take it up, right, via the root structure, right? So that's what that means. So there are some herbicides like glyphosate, right? We know has no residual. Anybody know why glyphosate doesn't have residual? It's the real reason is actually as soon as it touches the soil, it gets stuck so tight to the soil that it can't get off, right? So it can't get in the water solution, it gets stuck to the soil. So if it were able to get off of the soil and into the water, it would have residual control. But it gets stuck so tight, and then after being stuck for a little while, a bacteria comes along and says, I want to chew you up, and then chews it up and makes it into methyl and butyl and, you know, just random groups of things.
Same reason when you talk about the spray solution, right? It's doing the same thing. If the water's too far one direction with the pH, you got too many ions in there, iron, right? I mean, the soil is made up of a ton of ions like that, right? And then tied it up. Same reason.
And I have a slide on that as well as we get up here. So, you know, so this one here just gets stuck so tight to the soil for water hemp. Sometimes especially when you have high organic matter soils, it just can't get off. It gets stuck to the organic matter, stuck to the clay, can't get off. The next best group here might be this group 15s. We actually rely on these a lot. These are your dual products, your warrants, your outlooks, your Zidua-based products, and all of the premixes that are included in there, right? So what do you think about the weed control there? I would say, yeah, I would argue, yeah, that's 100% unacceptable, but at the same time, it's way better than this, right? So in those scenarios, we've got to say that it probably thinned out the herd. I'd have to go back and look at what I gave that for a weed control standpoint, but believe it or not, that's probably like 70% control, right? You've got to get into the low to mid 90s to call what I would call commercially acceptable by itself. 92, 93% control to be commercially acceptable. That's not commercially acceptable, but it did do something. I think we can agree on that. Then we get to our group 5s here, right? So group 5 here, there's one main herbicide in here that we're using, and that's metribuzin. So is anybody using metribuzin today in some sort of premix? Probably, right? So does pretty good on pigweeds, does pretty good on other things. When we talk about the benefits of metribuzin, and the benefit of metribuzin is also its downfall. Metribuzin is very water soluble, which means we get big rains, washes through the system, and therefore when it washes below where the weeds emerge, then it's no longer a good use of a herbicide because it doesn't stick very tightly to the soil. So that's good and bad. In my opinion, it's good because it's nice to have something that doesn't take very much rain to get it going, right? It only takes a couple tenths of rain to get it working. And what we need to do is we need to mix this chemical, this group 5, this metribuzin, with a chemical that takes a lot more water to get it in solution, right? So when you get a couple tenths of rain, you get it working, and then whenever you get your bigger rain, you get the other herbicide working, and you have kind of a bridge to make sure that you're protected in a droughty type scenario and in a really wet scenario. And then the last one here is your group 14s. So these are, this contains a lot of active ingredients, but this is kind of like your sulfentrazones, your authority brands, your Valor brands, your Fierces have things like that in there. And that tends to provide the best water hemp control. You know, we start looking at some of these for other things for, for mare's tail, right? These group 5s and group 14s are really good at mare's tail. So your metribuzins and your Valors are really good for mare's tail and things as well. So that's just to give you a flavor. That's not to, I mean, this is stuff that takes a long time to learn the nuances in and out, but we make it a lot more difficult than it has to be sometimes with all of our brand names, right? So, another thing with putting on the residual, can anybody see anything in this picture at all? Can you tell anything from the front to the back? Probably not. Kyle, you turn off the light, they're going to go to sleep on me. You might as well leave it on. Yeah. So maybe if I draw a line, can you see a little bit more there? Can you see the front? There's a lot more green versus the back. You really can't tell. Yeah, so there's 2 reasons why you can see more green. Look how much residue is in the front. Not much compared to the back where there's a lot of residue, right? So, and you also have a lot more weeds in the front than in the back. This was actually a trial that I did and I screwed it up. I was at a university, and university is known for having the most premier equipment from 1949, right? So I got in the tractor, they had the field cultivator. This was an early trial I'd set up with herbicides, right? I was looking at early burn downs. Can we put on a herbicide 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks before planting type of a thing and still get acceptable weed control? I had to jump a ditch with a really leaky cylinder on a field cultivator, and it had no driveway in it, and I was just so happy that I didn't tear up the grass and all the alleyways that I got in the field and I immediately put down the field cultivator and went through it, right? So we could tell that tillage has a major impact on our weed control. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. Here's what this blurry cell phone picture looks like a few weeks later. You can see shovel here, shovel here, shovel here, right? So not only do we need to put on the right herbicide at the right rate, we also have to be aware of tillage. That's not telling you that tillage is bad, but what happened, and you can see here, because again, I was using a 1948 field cultivator, we've got to have uniformity in the depth if we are going to do tillage, right? So just be aware of that. So herbicides are incorporated half the depth of whatever your tillage tool is. So if you are running a field cultivator at 4 inches, it's mixing herbicides to 2 inches. If you're using some sort of turbo till or something that's a couple inches, it's mixing the herbicide half that amount to 1 inch. So just keep that in mind as you do tillage, maybe after a herbicide or a pre-application. So this comes down to what's the goal of a pre? I thought I knew the answer to this, but then I started asking around and I had to start thinking a little bit. Who's using a pre in the room? Are you using pre-herbicide? Why are you guys using a pre?
Give us a chance to put the post on.
Get you a chance to put the post on? Give the guys in the back of the room a chance to get the post on too, right? Any other reason?
Keep the weeds from coming up to begin with.
Keep the weeds from coming up to begin with. Yeah, so I always thought, hey, this is pretty easy. The goal of a pre is a weed control, right? So now, since I do farm on the side, that is my goal, is to have a good weed control, because if a neighbor sees that I've got weeds in my field and I went to school for a decade to manage weeds, not very credible, right? So my goal might be a little bit different than a regular goal for somebody. But in general, the goal shouldn't be, I don't think, weed control, honestly. I think that we've focused on weed control, and we've focused on use a pre to help manage resistance and a lot of these other things. Yeah.
It's to preserve yield is what it's for.
ROI, right? Yeah. Return on investment. That's 100% what it is, right? So why would you do, there are times, but there are very few times you do something on your farm that shouldn't help increase your profits, or preserve your profits, right? The one thing I could think of is my dad's still active on the farm in the summer. He goes to Florida on November 1st, whether we're done farming or not. So we got to get done by November 1st. But what he does, and it drives me nuts, he likes to mow roadsides every 2 weeks, right? I'm like, you did nothing but waste my diesel fuel. But if it makes you happy, go for it, right? So, so ROI is the real reason why you should put on a pre, okay? So let's just think about this. What is your yield goal? What would you say, man, this is what I want my whole farm to average? 300, right? 300 bushel beans. Yeah. Yeah.
55, 60.
55, 60?
Yeah, if you can average 60 bushel across all our acres of beans around here, we're doing good.
I'm good. I took a swag yesterday and I said, let's take a yield analysis of 60 bushels, okay? So here is what we're gonna do. This is water hemp, and I use this because this is old giant ragweed, which I know you have a big problem with, is even higher yield reductions than water hemp. Mare's tail, this is going to be very similar to mare's tail, depending on the pressure and when it gets emerged, right? We all know that mare's tail that emerges in June, not going to have the same type of yield loss as mare's tail that emerges with the crop, right? So it's going to have more yield issues. So this is old data. This is from 2006, University of Illinois. I use this a lot in the Midwest because I don't like using current research a lot of times with growers, because has anybody ever been to a university research plot? Yes, have you been to some? And have you ever taken a look at the weed control plots? Have you ever taken a look at the non-treateds or the ones that aren't? What do they look like? You're like, oh my gosh, I've never seen weeds this bad in my life, right? Because essentially they are trying to get the biggest weed population they can, and it's a worst case scenario. Our fields don't look like that in most cases, right? Our farm fields don't look like that because we manage them differently. So this is 2006. This is what I would consider what a lot of our fields look like today. But back then, water hemp, they didn't even know what water hemp was almost. So this is the first stage, right? So they didn't have huge pressure. But so that's why you find that in Illinois, their weed-free was 51 bushel, which that would be much higher in a lot of plots today. But the goal here is what they did is they said, hey, what's the value of using a residual versus let's not use a residual and let's wait till the weeds get 2 inches tall. How much yield loss do we lose, right? And back in the day when they did this, everything was glyphosate sensitive still. So essentially all they did at 2-inch weeds, they sprayed Roundup. And then every week after that, they sprayed another treatment of Roundup on it to keep it clean, right? And same thing they did. They said, okay, at 4 inches, we're going to do nothing till the weeds hit 4 inches, and we're going to spray Roundup. And then they did it all the way to 10-inch weeds. We're going to let the weeds compete with the crop until we get to 10 inches and see what our yield was. So essentially, when do we try to spray our weeds? How big are they?
4 to 6 inches probably.
4 to 6 inches, I agree, yeah. Yep. So 4 inches, right? And I'll say 4 inches is where we plan to do it and we're trying to do it. What this shows here is the critical weed-free period. This is not something we talk about a lot. But for corn and soybeans, critical weed-free period is very early in the growth stage. This is from essentially when the plant emerges to about it gets to 3 leaves in corn and 3 or 4 trifoliates in soybeans. And so most of the yield loss actually comes early on, not late, right? Not from when our beans and we start seeing weeds poke through late in the season. It's actually from early competition where we see that. So, and this just shows that, right? Whenever they didn't put on a pre and it wasn't weed free for the first 4 inches of the weed, they had 13% yield loss, right? So let's put this in a scenario. We don't put on a pre, what's it look like? Don't put on a pre, we're gonna spray our glyphosate or whatever product we want at 4 inches. Well, in that scenario, 7.8 bushel yield loss, right? That's 13% of 60. $14. Anybody sell their beans too early like me? Probably not. No, yeah. So $14, $102 that you lost. Even if we come across with $25 or the herbicide, hey, we're at $84 that we actually gained by putting on a pre. It's an ROI issue. It's not a weed control issue. Now, for a lot of us, we're putting on, a pre-emergence herbicide. think about that a little bit. Can we put on something that is going to provide us more complete control for longer to help get us through that V3, V4 time frame to where we don't have any weeds competing to maximize our yield? And does that take another $5 in herbicides to do that, or whatever that may be, to help maximize that ROI equation? And it does help the weed control equation too. So this year though, I think the goal is a little bit different. What's the goal of a pre when you don't know what you're going to get post? I think we all hope, and we talked about our supply, and we hope that we get the products that we need at the time we need them. And I think that we're set up to do it, but just like the force majeure with glyphosate this weekend, we had no idea that was coming. That came right out of the blue for everyone. So what happens whenever the truck is delivered to show up, but it doesn't show up, right? Or even if it has an issue, it has a flat tire and can't get there, and you missed your window because you got a 3-inch rain, you can't get back for another 10 days. Something like that, right? So the goal this year in my mind should be reduce the number of weeds that you have to kill with your post herbicide. That is the entire goal of this year. So, or let me put it a different way. Pretend that you don't have post herbicides, right? Pretend that you don't, or you're not going to get the opportunity to spray post. So there's a couple ways to do this, but essentially this is put all your eggs in the front basket. And you know, Kyle talked a little bit about plan B, right? Make plan B. The best time to make a plan B or you know, is actually before you need your plan B. Well, if your plan B was to use a good residual herbicide, but the beans are already planted and up, you've missed that boat, right? And then when you have a problem getting your post herbicide, that becomes the problem, right? So, and I'm not trying to be a doomsday guy, because I think that, you know, I think that in the end we are going to work through all these issues and we're going to make sure that we're covered. I just like to be super duper prepared. That's just part of my nature. So, so yeah, so that's kind of all I have on the pre side. Any questions about pre's before we move on to some post stuff real quick? To the second step. I spent a lot of time on the pre. Going on to the post herbicide. This is really easy and very simple, especially with glyphosate. So we want to use a herbicide that kills the target species, right? So different way of putting this, if you've got glyphosate resistant mare's tail, using glyphosate doesn't really work very well, right? Pretty obvious there. But also glyphosate, I think we're finding, does have a lot of value, right? It does control most of the weeds, just not our driver weeds as well, like our giant ragweed or our mare's tail or maybe our water hemp in those scenarios. So it still provides a lot of value, but let's use a judicious rate of these herbicides and not of both glyphosate and glufosinate. And we got to make sure that we're applying them correctly. So what's that look like? Anybody want to tell me the rate of glyphosate that they used last year?
24.
24? Anybody use anything else?
Rates of glyphosate?
Yeah. What do you think?
40, 48, depending on the weeds.
40, 48? Yep. Is that a 4-pound gallon or is that like a Power Max? Yes.
Or a 5-pound gallon.
Yep. 5-pound stuff. Yep. So, you know, so essentially, you know, if we're looking at a Power Max type product, you know, we increased these rates a long time ago because, hey, our mare's tail wasn't dying, let's add a little more, right? And then we added a little more whenever it quit working. And we were still kind of got on this treadmill of increasing rates. I'm not saying that's bad, but what that did do is we started using a lot more. Well, why did we not care? Because it was cheap, right? It was really cheap. Now, it was available. Cheap and available, yeah. So cheap and available. Now we're at the point where let's get back down, at least initially, to a rate of a herbicide that's still effective while not being excessive. Every ounce that you use is, I mean, whenever you're talking about, you know, 50 cents an ounce or whatever that may be, that's a lot compared to whenever that was like 10 ounces last year, you know, or something like that. So, you know, in this case with like Power Max, you know, just going back from your quart to, you know, the 22 ounce rate, well, you turn your 2.5 gallon jug goes from doing 10 acres to almost 15, right? So you actually really stretch that. Think about the price of your 2.5 gallon jug today. and that's real dollars today. It wasn't very many real dollars last year, right? Gets even bigger whenever you start talking about totes, right? So here's my additional thoughts though. If we're gonna decrease that rate, we can run into trouble. There's two ways that we can run into trouble. We don't apply it correctly, and we don't use the right additives. So not applying it correctly means that we wait until our weeds are really tall, right? A lot of times we increase our rate as our weeds get taller. So we start putting on a small rate, we're not gonna have that good a weed control, right? If we have large weeds. So we've gotta get out there a little sooner, and then we've gotta think about our adjuvants. So you spent all this time talking about adjuvants, and we talked a little bit about how it got stuck to the soil, but essentially, AMS is essentially a very key thing. That's one of the components in Max Supreme. So when we start thinking about AMS, what does it actually do? All of our herbicides, except for two, paraquat and diquat, so gramoxone is the only one we really use, all of them besides gramoxone have a negative charge, okay? Does that make sense? So when it's formulated, how is your glyphosate formulated today? You probably hear people say, oh, hey, K-salt, right? You hear that? It's an IPA salt. Do you hear that in your glyphosate formulation? Essentially, glyphosate has a negative charge, and it's formulated in a salt. Salt just means positive charge. Isopropylamine just has a positive charge connected to glyphosate to make it neutral. Everything wants to be in their happy place, right? Potassium salt, K-salt, it's just a positive charge connected to the negative glyphosate. As soon as glyphosate gets in water, it disassociates with that salt that it was formulated in, and now it has a negative charge. We all know that things want to be equal. And so in your case, it's iron, and you know, in my geography, it's calcium is the big one. So iron, depending on which iron you're talking about, has a +2 or a +3 charge, right? So that means that negative glyphosate binds with that positive charge, or even with iron, let's say that you have 3 glyphosates that bind to 1 iron that has a +3 charge. Now that glyphosate is no longer a herbicide, it's bound up. So glyphosate was originally used as something called a chelator. It was something that went around a metal ion to protect it. So that was its first registered use, not as a herbicide. So we want to prevent that from happening. So we add AMS to the tank, ammonium sulfate, right? And essentially it's diammonium sulfate. There's two ammonium, 1 sulfate ion. The sulfate goes ahead and binds to the iron. So then the iron can't bind to the glyphosate. The glyphosate binds to the ammonium, so it still binds to something, but it binds with something that in the end ammonium is needed in the plant, and it actually helps drive the herbicide into the plant. So it's actually a good thing in this scenario, right? So that's why you use AMS. So the harder your water hardness is a scale of how many positively charged metals do you have in your water. So the more hard, the more AMS you need to counterbalance that. So before there were some people, and there's probably some of you that said, I didn't need any AMS, right? I'll be like that. I've been told that many times, and I've done that before and killed weeds before without adding AMS because I didn't want to go get that last bag. The difference was I'm using 48 ounces of glyphosate. I'm not using 22, right? So I've lowered essentially my increased rate was just to bind with the metal ions in the water, and I leave the rest of it to do its dirty work. The other thing is surfactant. Glyphosate its surfactant package is it's not non-ionic. It's actually an anionic surfactant, so it has a negative charge on the surfactant. We sell non-ionic surfactant, but whenever you go from, say, a 44 ounces of Power Max to a 22 ounce of Power Max, you have half as much herbicide, but you also have half as much surfactant in the load. So you might think about adding just a little bit of surfactant to help spread that herbicide out and drive it into the plant. Then apply it correctly. Apply to small weeds, do the things that we're supposed to do, right? Any questions about glyphosate at all? That was probably a little bit too sciencey. I got on nerd freak. Yeah, I got a little bit excited, and sorry, I'll bring it back down a little bit. So, so this weekend, I took my my 2-year-old to Buffalo Wild Wings after church, and I had to break the news to her that, hey, honey, look, I spent your entire college tuition on a total glyphosate, so sorry about that. That's the look that she gives you. So for glufosinate, for Liberty, so do we use much Liberty around this geography? Yep, use a little bit of Liberty. It's a good product. It works better. The hotter, the more humid, the more sunlight you have, right? So there's things that you have to do. Probably a quart is the rate that you're using now. Are you using higher than that in some cases? Yeah, some higher than that. Yep. So spray small weeds. We got to spray those 3-inch weeds. They're contact herbicides, especially when we get to things like giant ragweed, mare's tail, water, pretty well any weed that has a lot of leaves. So think about weeds that have a lot of leaves. Because that's contact herbicide, yeah, we can fry off the top, but we never get down below that, right? So that's why we have to spray those weeds when they're small, because we just don't get control of the canopy below that weed, or the rest of the plant below that weed. So you got to spray small. You talked a lot about nozzles, right? So, you know, and we talked about, you know, we use some of those AI nozzles, and you saw those TTI big old droplets. We've got to get back towards some of those twin jets, some of those, they actually call them coarse droplets, but they're fine in comparison to what we've been using today. So we got to get smaller droplets to make sure that we get coverage all over that leaf. Environment, here's where AMS is so important with this. And so again, that's what Max Supreme does. We need a couple pounds of AMS per acre in these loads at least. So use your Max Supreme and guar. So this is something, again, I told you I was not, I don't have any sales goals, or don't really, I mean, I do care about the health of our company, but I don't have any sales goals on a day-to-day basis. So I was really pushed back. You know, when I started Max Supreme, you know, they call it blue goo or Smurf juice or whatever they want to call it. It's blue, right? You know, it's pretty evident. And they say, well, this guar, it's the best stuff ever. And I kind of pushed back a little bit. I'm like, I don't know if we need this. You know, grad school, we did a lot of adjuvant stuff. We didn't do a lot with guar-based stuff. That's what Max Supreme has in it. So I started going out to trials, and I started doing it. And in the end, the biggest benefit that I could find, especially with contact herbicides, because I always thought of guar as a DRA. That's how we talk about a drift reduction adjuvant, right? But really the big benefit of guar is, yes, it does make droplets a little bigger, but it makes them, just like Kyle said, it makes them wetter longer, like with the surfactant. But the wetter longer is in a different scenario. When we are under less humid environments, so think about a year before you get a rain, and you think it's 30–40% humidity, those droplets dry up in 30–60 seconds on that leaf. And what that means is there's herbicide crystals that are essentially left in the plant, on the surface of the plant, they didn't get in, okay? So that's one way it helps. It leaves that droplet wetter longer to allow that herbicide to get in the plant, to go to its site of action where it has to go. The other thing is some of those driftable fine droplets, those really fine droplets, they never hit the surface. They evaporate before they ever get to the ground. And so by putting this in, you do get more of those droplets that actually land on the surface, right? So guar, so after doing about 5 trials over about 3 years, I said, okay, there's a definite benefit, especially when it's not humid out, right? We talk about it being humid in the summer when it's hot and you're sweating, right? But if you start taking a look at the humidity, a lot of times it's 90 degrees and it's 35% humidity. Right? That's not, it feels hot to us, but it's not humid. You know, we get up to 90 degrees or 80 degrees and 60% humidity, we have a lot more dwell time for that droplet. It takes a lot longer for it to dry. So just be aware of the humidity, especially if you get a period of time where it seems like our storms are more spread out to where it's feast or famine. We get a long period without rainfall. If you get 10, 12, 14 days without rain, you can almost guarantee that your humidity is low. It starts out at 100% at 6 a.m. By about 11 a.m., it's 35% humidity. Then you get a rain, and then it's 60% all day after that. So particularly after you've had a dry spell, that's when your humidity tends to be low. And then here's the last thing, use those overlapping residuals. So a true overlapping residual is you spray your pre, and then you spray this overlapping residual, so another residual product, before a weed emerges. So all you're spraying is bare ground. That's the true overlapping residual. That's what we've been doing on our farm for many years now, because I have not wanted to spray dicamba out of my personal sprayer. I didn't want to accept that risk and liability. That's why, you know, there's a lot of risk and liability there, and I wasn't willing to do it. So I spray overlapping residuals, and I would include glyphosate in the mix. So it was glyphosate and my overlapping residual and my adjuvants that I was using at the time. That was the entire mix. And I was able to get away with that because I was spraying my resistant weed species, glyphosate resistant weed species, before they came up, right? So I was truly spraying my pre right after planting, coming back 23 days later, spraying my post, and then I was trying to get to crop canopy as fast as I could. Okay, so does that work all the time? No. 2017 we had a big drought, and in my area we sprayed our pre, we didn't get any rainfall. 18 days later I had 4-inch water hemp out the wazoo, and I called in my FS location to spray dicamba on the crop, right? So it doesn't work all the time. It works whenever you get those rainfall events in a more normal spring. So there can be some flaws to that as well. But in the end, just like Kyle said, the easiest weed to control is one that never emerges. We can see that mare's tail when it gets to be this tall. How hard is it to kill? We're throwing the kitchen sink and everything else that we can at it. It's a lot easier to kill if we kill the seed. So lastly here's some cultural practices. Tillage, right? So we could do some tillage, some mechanical practices here. You could change your rotation, right? If you had something so bad where you couldn't get control of it, or you didn't think you could go to a couple of years of corn or something to try to use the herbicides, the HPPDs and other chemistries just to help lower that weed population. You know, tillage is really good with mare's tail, right? Mare's tail germinates from the top 1/4 inch soil. So if we flip that soil over or do something, we automatically reduce the amount of mare's tail that we have to deal with. You know, same thing with a lot of other weed species. Change your rotation planting date. When are we planting now? Later or earlier? As early as we can, right? And why are we doing that? More yield, right? ROI, right? ROI on early planting is good until it's not good, but it's been good, right? So, you know, you can do some things. If you're planting early, what's that typically mean? That means you get to crop canopy sooner. So that could be good. That can also be a struggle sometimes planting earlier, because you know, things like giant ragweed tend to germinate in the early spring, so you have to deal with that a little bit more in that situation. So there's some trade-offs there, early versus late. Think about your herbicide timing, like we talked about with that overlapping residuals. Anybody think they're going to get their row cultivator out this year? Hope not. I mean, I can tell you that I can't cultivate with auto steer. I don't want to row cultivate, okay? So I'm not going to be that good at it. I put rope wick applicators. When's the last time you used a rope wick applicator? How well did it work then?
If you did 2 ways, it did good, but you had to go 2 ways.
Yeah. So I get it took a lot of time, and I ran over a lot of crop, and I get a lot of people that don't even want to talk about it. They said, I didn't like it then, and I'm not going to do it now, right? So, but there is a company in Missouri and in Arkansas that actually make brand new rope wick applicators because there is a demand for it because of the weed resistance profile. So am I suggesting that we go and start talking about this? No. What I'm saying is do the steps above that we talked about so that you don't get to this point where you think you got to get your rope wick applicator out, right?
Yeah, when we're spraying them 4-inch weeds.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you know, and a rope wick applicator works whenever your weeds are this tall and your crop's this tall, right? They don't really work underneath the canopy. It's just helping your sore eyes is all that's doing. So the last thing here is think about row spacing. The narrower the rows, the quicker you get to crop canopy. Crop canopy is called free weed control. So the faster you get to crop canopy, that's whenever you have less chance of weeds coming up. So this is just Illinois, 2 sides here, 30-inch rows towards the end of June versus 15-inch rows. Which side would you rather have if your herbicide is running out of gas, right? You'd rather have the one on the right-hand side. So essentially those are those 3 things again, or those are those things. Use that pre, use full rate of that pre, use effective post and use it judiciously. Use those overlapping residuals and think about what you could do that isn't exactly herbicide related to help manage the weeds on your farm. With that, that's what I have. Questions, concerns, comments, thoughts? push back. Yeah.
About cover crops.
Cover crops for weed control, I guess is what you're assuming. So, yeah, so cover crops for weed control. I actually know a lot about this because some of my project was saying, can we actually have an allelopathic potential on weed seeds by using different cover crops? And I also dealt with some people. Yeah. You know how when you plant alfalfa 2 years later, you can't go and plant alfalfa into your alfalfa stand because it won't come up, right? That's allelopathy. So essentially, can we plant a crop that has allelopathy, the potential to block the weed from emerging? Can we plant that and then use that to kill the seed and make it not viable or not come up? So I was looking at that. And then we were also using that in conglomeration with some organic productions, right? So what can we do to help weed control in organic productions? And so essentially, yes, they can help. Typically, it's not going to be the legumes, right? Legumes bring on a whole bunch of weeds because weeds tend to be luxurious consumers of nitrogen, right? They'll suck up as much nitrogen as there. So if you like to look at lamb's quarters, plant a legume cover crop and you'll have lamb's quarters, right? Now, probably we're most likely thinking about things like rye would be my guess. It'd be our most common one. If you get rye thick enough, which it will if you give it time, and if you give it enough height and time, it can significantly reduce the number of weeds. The thing that I find that people, maybe I was going to say incorrectly, but it's just your practice, right? Is that if we're looking for weed control, we've got to let them get tall. We've got to let the biomass get out there. Sometimes we get concerned and we want to spray them just during green up in the spring when they're 6 inches tall or so. So if you let it get 1.5 feet tall, you can have some heck of weed control, even for not only winter annuals, but for summer annuals. If we have rye that's short and we plant it in the fall, we help with things like henbit, chickweed. We can help some with mare's tail as well, but we're not going to help a whole lot with the weeds that come up in May and June.
And keep in mind too, when those of you that have cover crop, you got to make sure you're controlling it. But there's a difference between annual rye and cereal rye. Cereal rye is going to be a lot easier to kill, right, than annual rye. But the other thing is, most likely are you using the spray to kill your cover crop in the spring?
Glyphosate.
Glyphosate. What's tight this year? Glyphosate. So to David's point, for weed control, you got to let it get enough height. But you also have to make sure you control that because in a crop, right, in a soybean crop, if you have rye that's not killed, that's considered a weed. Any plant that you don't want there in the field grown is considered a weed, right? So a lot of things to consider, even more so this year than in a normal year. So back to think through that, right? As you're going through, there's going to be a pros and cons to both of those. Make sure you get out at the proper time. Don't let it get too tall to where you can't control with 20, 22 on 2 rates that David was talking about. Good question. Appreciate it, guys. I know we're waiting between you and lunch. We'll be around for lunch. We have to get going about 12:30 or so. After that, we got to drive to Andover for another one of these. But appreciate the time. So everybody does get something. You got knives in the white thing here, so make sure you take those with you, your yardsticks. But the big prize that you guys want is the winner of what Jeremy kicked us off with. So Clint, where's Clint? You are the winner, buddy. $200 Amazon gift card. Congratulations. Thank you guys, really appreciate the time. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to your Centerra team. They got a lot of answers, they got a lot of expertise, and they can get a hold of us if you had anything specific to today's presentation. So.
Hey, can we put up the results?
The guy back there in the blue is the one that graded it, so if you're disappointed, that's the guy to yell at.
I want to see what the true answer is, the right answer.
He had it up there. Yeah, actually,
Sorry, you're asleep in that.
Go ahead, yeah.
I do want to thank you for coming. Lunch will be out here. What we recommend as we look to this season, if you haven't yet talked to your crop specialist about your plans for weed control for this year, please do so as soon as possible and plan. That's the one thing we tell our folks, whether it's our agronomists or managers, we have to plan. Our industry has operated for years on you order it today, you have it tomorrow. Tomorrow it's in your warehouse. That's just not happening anymore. We talked about the supply issues. We talked about the issues at the ports, but one of the huge issues is trucks.
Yeah, and you mentioned that.
When you go to our ports, one of the reasons we have so many ships sitting out off the coast of California waiting to come in is because the docks are full of containers that can't get away. It's one of the major issues. We used to be able to order a bulk load of Roundup today, and it'd be in our tank tomorrow. Today, the trucks just aren't there. That's one of the major issues is transportation. So plan, let us know what you need, sooner the better. Because the sooner we can let Kyle know what we need, the better our odds are of getting it.
So this is a really practical thing, and just full transparency. So Bayer, who's a strong partner of Growmark, they announced, not just with Growmark, but anything east of Indiana, they're not delivering. Growmark, fortunately, we have our own trucking company. We're doing the hauling ourselves, but you can imagine what they told us a month ago that they were going to do today changes, and now we're having to get the loads ourselves and haul them from, I don't, David, you might know, where do we pull that from? Somewhere in Illinois, from the Bayer facility, and truck it all the way out here. Not just here. I mean, we've got locations all the way on the East Coast into the Delmarva, right? Growmark's having to do that because Bayer made the corporate decision that they're not going to deliver east of Indiana. And we only have a limited amount of trucks too.
Is that because of market share or unavailable trucks?
Unavailability of trucks, and probably a combination of drivers and trucks, right? So they can't deliver everything west of there, so they just said it, hey, we're not going to deliver anything past basically March, that they're not going to deliver anything. So anything in season, we've got stuff that we're delivering now, but it's coming on Growmark trucks. Yep. It's a trucking issue. And then
Major trucking issue, definitely.
Yep.
So, okay, with that, lunch will be out here. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And thanks for coming.